The worst humanitarian crisis in the world. That's how the United Nations describes the situation in Yemen. Years of conflict have decimated the country, especially its children who are dying of starvation in many cases. Nearly 3/4 of Yemen's population rely on humanitarian assistance for survival. That's nearly 22 million people. While the situation remains dire, Yemen is struggling to get the aid that it needs. The UN asked member countries to pledge more than $4 billion to the crisis in Yemen. They only got $1.2 billion. I want to bring in Thomas Sadoski. He is an actor and activist and the founding ambassador for War Child USA. Thomas, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us and calling attention to this. You wrote this opinion piece on CNN.com, Too Hungry to Weep, the tragedy of Yemen's starving children. And we're just not paying enough attention to this issue. You're absolutely right about this. You recently got back from Yemen. Tell us what you saw there.
Well, thank you, first of all, for taking the time. It's a situation that far too few people know about, and I'm a firm believer in the decency of the American people, and I truly believe that if people really knew what was happening over there, the action on it would be swift and significant. What it's like on the ground is almost impossible to describe. There is something that really hits in the deepest part of you when you are in the presence of children who are starving to death. I'm a father myself, but I think just as a human being, there is something really primitive that gets woken up in you, this need to protect and this need to care and this need to do something. And the unfortunate reality on the ground in Yemen is that that suffering is everywhere. It just seeps through every interaction that you have with every person. You can see it in the faces of everyone that you come across, and you can see it strewn all about you on the streets. It's an extraordinarily brutal and difficult thing to see in practice.
Yeah, and we're showing our viewers some of your video and pictures when you visited schools in Yemen. These children are absolutely beautiful, and to think about how they're suffering, it's just it's unimaginably painful. I'm sure to see it on your side of things when you go and visit. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, well, first of all, those kids are kids. They're the thing that happens, particularly with this organization that I'm so fortunate to work with, and to have been on the ground with over there, War Child USA and War Child Canada, through our local partners in Yemen, have been able to work with the local community to have these safe spaces for the kids to go and get to be kids. And you see, when you cross the threshold from the towns outside and the reality, the brutal, bleak reality of the outside world, when you cross the threshold into these schools, you get to see that extraordinary and beautiful thing that happens when children get to be children. You get to see them laughing and running and playing and all of the things that we associate with that incredible beauty of childhood, and to see them learning and to hear a word repeated again and again and again, which is so rare when you are talking about active war zones. You're talking about active conflict, and that word is pride. And these kids talk about being proud to be able to be in school and being proud to be able to learn and being proud of the things that they have learned, and the knowledge that they're onboarding. It's really incredible, and it just makes what's happening on the other side of the wall that much more sort of impossible to digest certainly on an intellectual level, but on an emotional level, on a spiritual level. It really breaks your heart when you step back out on the other side and see, oh, this is the world the kids are going to be walking back out into.
Yeah, and Thomas, you write in your piece, having spent the past week in Washington with members of Congress and the Senate regarding the crisis, it is apparent that political and fiscal calculations flourish when media coverage is fleeting and outrage muted. As one senator sterilely offered during our meeting, that's a lot of money, a lot indeed. How do you get Americans, especially in Washington, to care about this crisis?
What a good question. Unfortunately, the simple answer, which would seem to be the best, which is that, as a a country that has a military footprint in the crisis itself, that on a foundational level, we're morally and ethically called upon to care, isn't an answer that seems to get much traction, particularly in Washington. So what do you do? How do you appeal to folks over there? I was very heartened to see a small, albeit loud, bipartisan group get together and try to do some work around the War Powers Act with Syria. I would love nothing more than to see some follow through on that regarding what's happening in Yemen. But more importantly, what you have to understand is that this is a situation that continues to degrade, right? It's not getting better. Children aren't turning a corner and getting the help that they need. And at the same time, American aid is also degrading. Secretary Blinken announced a couple of weeks ago, in this big press conference, so we're going to be giving $440-something million to the United Nations fund for Yemen. That's a 25% reduction from what they gave last year. That wasn't mentioned in his press conference. I don't know how you can square that circle. I don't understand a world in which we're saying we're going to help by doing less. That doesn't make sense to me, and it certainly doesn't make sense to the parents of these children who are starving to death in this country, where, again, we have moral, ethical, and responsibility because we have been involved in the conflict. And I think that the reality is, as a being blessed as a member of my society, living in the country that I live in with all of the incredible gifts that it provides me, the responsibility that I have to pay back those gifts is, I don't get to use ignorance as an excuse.
Yeah.
If that phrase U.S. backed is hung on a situation, I don't get to claim ignorance.
Absolutely, and simply put, we can't let these children starve to death. I mean, we just can't let that happen. Thomas Sadoski, great work over there. Thank you for shining a light on this. Please come back and do it again. Thomas Sadoski from War Child USA will continue to focus on this. Thanks very much for your time. We appreciate it.